Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And happy Remembering Resistance Day! Woohoo!
Yay!
Yay! It is the second annual event that we are here to celebrate all things Star Wars Resistance. We are sharing our passion for the show all weekend long. We have released a bunch of episodes to bring to you Star Wars Resistance, as we would like to call you all, because we love the show so much. And even though it kind of came into our lives and left very quickly, we never want to forget all the memories that it brought us and all the great characters and storylines and just amazing Star Wars moments that we so deeply cherish. And we have a very special episode on this year's Remembering Resistance Day. We are joined by both the executive producer and head writer of the series, Brandon Auman. Brandon has written quite a few episodes as well that are just absolutely amazing, including The Recruit and The Escape, which respectively are the series premiere and finale, as well as the season 1 finale, No Escape, and a couple of others, including A Quick Salvage Run and The Relic Raiders featuring Mika Gray. So really, really great stuff from Brandon and the team.
You may also know his work from executive producing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series, or you might be aware of his upcoming series for Amazon, Critical Role. All exciting projects. But we really wanted to talk to Brandon about Resistance because if there's anybody who has the inside knowledge about how the show was made, if there's anybody who had a huge hand in determining where the story went and how it would all end up, it was Brandon. And we were so thrilled to talk to him on this episode about what it was like to get the position as executive producer, what it was like to craft this story, lots of things that were ideas that were thrown out into the universe, but were left ultimately on the cutting room floor. And we got to talk a lot about the story and how it started and where it ended up.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was such a pleasure to have him on the show. This is probably one of my favorite episodes that we've done for Bebo's Book Report. And I learned quite a bit too about what went into the show, and it just grew my appreciation for it. I think I could speak for both of us in saying that was the case. So without further ado, it's time to turn it over to our interview with head writer and executive producer, Brandon Auman.
It's unbelievable. I never thought I'd see one of these, let alone be on board.
It's a classic. This old girl saw action from the Battle of Scarif all the way up to Jakku.
I can't believe I'm really here on a Resistance ship with Poe Dameron. You're the pilot everybody talks about back home.
You're a pretty good pilot yourself. You scored a hit on that red tie. No one else has ever done that. Except me, of course.
Well, it's a lot easier when you've got good teamwork.
We are so excited today to be joined by both the head writer and executive producer on Star Wars Resistance, Brandon Auman. Brandon, welcome to Friends of the Force.
Thank you both for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we are just so ecstatic because, here we are, the second annual Remembering Resistance Day. I mean, we did this event last year because we were just in our feels mid-pandemic, just missing Resistance. We were so sad without it, and we wanted to create this day to celebrate this amazing show that you and the rest of the Lucasfilm team created. So I'd love to hear, just to start, what has it meant to you to continue seeing the love of this show, as we approach almost 2 years since the show has been over? Like, what's it like to just see so much support still?
I mean, it's just so incredibly moving, like just for the fans to reach out and to have this, Remembering Resistance. And just hearing from the fans, like through Instagram or Facebook, it's just been such a thrill. It's just been so incredibly emotional and moving. And more people are finding, Resistance, through Disney Plus. So it's just, every day I hear from more and more fans. So it seems like the fan base has been building over the past couple of years, and that's amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely easier than ever to find on Disney Plus. And as people are going through all of the Star Wars canon, they're like, I gotta watch Resistance. And I'm like, darn right you do. It's so good. So
thank you so much.
It's been exciting to see some of my friends who had, not dived into the show yet or hadn't touched animation and were just fans of the movies to join in and join the Resistance train because it's a good one. So.
Oh, that's so great to hear.
So yeah, I would love to start just with, kind of a broader picture of your personal relationship with Star Wars. Like, what is your Star Wars story? Like, what are some of your first memories as a fan, and kind of how did you pave your way to not only being a fan but also working within the sandbox?
Well, I mean, as a kid, I watched Star Wars over and over and over, like the original trilogy. And then, when the prequels came out on DVD, I was just obsessively watching them. I'm a huge prequel nerd. So I love all Star Wars equally. Like, I don't, like there's no Star Wars that I put over other Star Wars because they're just all so amazing. And as a kid, just like watching the original trilogy, like on VHS, like I would watch to the point where I would just do my own transcripts. Like I would make my own scripts, like based off of like Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. That's how I learned how to write, really, just like watching the original movies and just like, and those were my first like scripts as a little kid, like just like, and that's really how I kind of understood like story structure and characters. And then from there, I would play the Star Wars RPG. I was really into, tabletop role playing, and I would create my own Star Wars scenarios and campaigns. I was really interested in like Return of the Jedi, so I wanted like there to be Ewoks and go back to Endor, and like I tried to I tried to like include Ewoks and Endor, even in Resistance, but Filoni was a little hesitant. He was like, well, and also they weren't quite sure how that was going to line up with like the new movies. So, I'm just such a huge fan, and would, I still collect the toys. I still collect the RPGs. That's never really stopped.
I gotta say though, I would love to have seen Niku interact with an Ewok. I think my heart would have melted onto the floor.
Believe me, like I totally had, that was one of the first things that I thought of. I was like, Niku has to meet Ewoks, but Dave was a little hesitant. And the main thing was, they just weren't quite sure how like the end of the, sequel trilogy was really going to line up with Resistance, which was always sort of a, just difficult sort of process working on the show. It was just really like, J.J. Abrams was changing, the last story so frequently, and we just didn't know where it was going to kind of land, even in editing. So that was kind of difficult, but it was such a blast to work on that show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned how you kind of learned how to write from Star Wars and watching the movies over and over, and talking about building those stories and writing out those transcripts. What then led you to working in animation, becoming a writer and director, producer, all those sorts of roles within animation, and deciding that this was the career path for you?
Well, I mean, I always loved to draw. So that was like, I studied film and animation in film school. Like I was really I wanted to always do both. But once I got into animation, I kind of held off more on like the art side, because I just decided that I wasn't good enough. Like, but I always loved writing. Like, I always write and draw my own comics, my own RPGs, my own like, I would illustrate my own stories and like little books. But eventually I was just like, I really have to just focus on, it can't be both. I've got to focus on one or the other. So I really just got into the writing side. I still draw like all the time, but I feel more satisfied by writing. Ultimately, like, you can spend hours drawing a picture, and then I would, show it to my mom, whoever, but, giving her a story and making my mom or my sister, read those stories growing up, like it just felt more satisfying because they would take the time to get into the world. But I always loved doing both. And then it just really, that path just led me into writing full time in animation and just working that side and just working with incredible artists. That's just always been a thrill.
I have to go back to one other comment that you made, even though you don't put any Star Wars on a higher pedestal than others, although you are a prequel lover. Sarah and I also do love the prequels as well. They hold
really do.
such a special place in our heart because it's so layered in so many ways. Even though people can debate on the quality all day, I think the through line is there with the galactic politics and the dark side versus the light side. It's all baked into there, right? And I would love to know, like, as you get closer to finally getting to work for Lucasfilm, like, how did that experience come about? And also, like, did your love for the prequels help to influence like how you wanted to approach like your first time working there, like especially like with Resistance and other things that you were doing?
Well, I got into Lucasfilm. Really, like they knew my work from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which growing up I was a huge fan of TMNT as well. So that was sort of a big aspect of how I got in. Like I first met Carrie Beck and Josh Rhimes, and they were just awesome, super lovely. And Carrie was telling me how like her little son was a big fan of TMNT, and I think that also very much helped. And we just hit it off. Like we're just talking about this new show, which was super secretive at the time. And they showed me a little bit of art, and they were trying to find out if I was interested, and definitely interested because, Star Wars is like a dream. And I'd met Filoni, a couple of years earlier, and he was awesome, super, super lovely guy. And they were like, why don't you fly up north and meet with Dave and see where it goes. And that's pretty much what happened. I flew up, I met with him. He's a huge Godzilla fan, and I love kaiju movies and Godzilla. And so we, hit it off from that aspect. And I was just spending time in his office, and we were just mostly talking about toys and Godzilla films and other things that, like Dave's interested in. Dave is very sort of compartmentalized with his interests. Like he really loves wolves, and he really loves Lord of the Rings, and he really loves Godzilla movies. I mean, he even built this crazy Mecha Godzilla suit back in the day. I don't know if many people know that, but it was super detailed and looks just like the suit from like the 70s films. So I was really impressed by, Dave not just being a great storyteller and an artist, a great illustrator, an animator, but also the fact he could build these giant suits and props. It was just like another testament to his genius. So, after meeting with him and other execs at Lucasfilm, I went back and I was sort of waiting, and they were like, "You got the job." And from there, it just took off like a freight train.
What a feeling.
You're like, shout out to my fandom of Godzilla for getting me here. Now I get to work on a Star Wars. That's pretty awesome.
Love of kaiju. Although he doesn't like King Kong very much, but he does love Godzilla. He's very specific, like in his kaiju or in his, giant monsters. He's like, yeah, I'm not a fan of monkeys. I don't really like apes.
Oh, no.
I'm like, that's so specific, like such a specific thing and such a broad sort of, but it's funny because that's one of the reasons why I put the Kowakian ape, in Resistance. Mm-hmm. And I had all those Kowakian monkeys like running around that derelict ship with Poe. It was sort of like a little like dig at Filoni. That's why I had Poe like saying, like, I hate monkeys. That was sort of like a little Filoni reference that not a lot of people necessarily know.
That's excellent.
I do got to say the giant monster love comes through between, the hunt on Celsor 3 and also Bebo's mom, of course. She's iconic. Like the concept art for her is stunning. You see like her full, size and everything. Awesome. Yeah,
that was really cool and like really, really difficult to pull off. We've got all the water, the interactive water, and then giant monster. But yeah, that was just, a blast. That episode's one of my favorites.
It's also one of our favorites. We are big Niku fans over here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Dave Filoni, and he's obviously been instrumental to Star Wars animation and kind of crafting what that world looks like. But he also served as an executive producer on this show. And what was it like to collaborate with him, in those early conversations and also kind of crafting the beginning of the series and that sort of stuff? And what perspective did he bring to the table other than loving large monsters but hating King Kong?
It's funny. Like, I mean, Dave's such a Star Wars expert, but he's also just great at being like a trailblazer and like taking the franchise into different and new directions, which I think is so important. Like, very early on, I was pitching like to Dave, like some ideas, and Dave was sort of like, well, it's just like, let's, because I want to bring back, obviously like iconic characters and things like that. But Dave really wants to just like push it in a new direction, which I totally, early on, I was just like, okay, I get it. Like I started kind of feeling what Dave was looking for. Like big influences on the show that we talked about early on up at Skywalker Ranch was Robotech, which is an 80s anime show that I watched as a little kid. And, and he was a huge fan of as well. And also a movie called The Right Stuff, which is, like a movie about Chuck Yeager, which obviously you've got that, the influence there. Clearly, we that name influenced the Yeager. So,
yeah.
but Chuck Yeager was like, he was like the first pilot to break the sound barrier, and he was an experimental test pilot and such a maverick. And obviously he become our version of Yeager became Yeager. And really, those were the two big influences that Filoni had in his head. Like, he wanted to do the show for years, and originally it was going to be set, it wasn't going to be set necessarily during the sequel trilogy, because he had it in his head. It was probably going to be set maybe like the time of the original trilogy, but like sort of in the very outskirts. He always wanted it to take place in the outskirts, because he just wanted to show a different sort of, a different aspect, a different part of the galaxy. He was sort of like, he wanted to feel a little bit more contained and like not necessarily a part of like this big war, because then it becomes sort of similar to, other things that he's done, like Clone Wars, and he was really trying to figure out, he just wanted to do something different, and he wanted it to be originally more about racing. And then when I came on board, I had some of the racing aspects, but I was a little bit hesitant to make it too much about racing, because then, I was just concerned that the show would just sort of feel like, what every episode's going to be about. It's going to be about racing. So I wanted to kind of like start there, but then take it in different directions, especially as we get closer and closer to, the sequel trilogy all-out war that was going to happen.
Do you feel that there was like an inflection point within the season 1 story where you said like, oh, this is going in a whole new direction that is really exciting, that we hadn't really maybe even planned for or did plan for? Like, was there that kind of moment where you're like, we have something really special on our hands? Because I think for Sarah and I can say like, for us, it was the Colossus taking off, because you're just like, holy crap. And I think people had kind of like been talking about it leading up to the finale, wondering, is it going to fly? Is it, are there engines down there? But was there anything like, from a writer's room and executive producer perspective that you went like, this is it. This is the thing that we're doing now?
It's funny, because even discussing like early on, like we knew that the Colossus was going to take off. Like we knew that it was going to fly. And that's also very kind of Robotech. The idea that there's a kind of like a giant, kind of ship that can traverse, the galaxy that houses, a bunch of, essentially like a very small city. We knew that early on, that the Colossus was going to take off. But what we didn't know was like how involved the First Order was going to be. But I really wanted to sort of push it in a direction where like, at first it feels very isolated, but then as the First Order is beginning to rise, then obviously the Colossus is going to get involved, because, they're so close to wild space that that eventually they're going to have to get involved. Even in some ways, as far away as from the galaxy and all the politics as the Colossus is, they're actually very, very close to the First Order and their testing grounds essentially out in wild space. So there's something really interesting there. But if you check out a movie like The Right Stuff, you'll see how very similar it is. And even the fact these guys are ex-pilots, like our version of Yeager is very much like, he's a guy who just wanted to get away from everything, and he gets sucked right back into it, which is like classic kind of, old school kind of Star Wars character.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I was literally just watching No Escape before hopping onto this Zoom call, and there's the line where Dozy is essentially saying that I'm gonna report you to the Republic, and he's like, you're far away from the Republic, but we're not far away. We're not too far away, to get to you. And then they kind of arrest him, and I was like, oh, I forgot how scary that moment was, and how the locations throughout the galaxy really place them in a ultimately precarious situation because of their proximity or the lack thereof to the things that matter. And especially like in a landscape like Castellon, they're the only, station there. It's a very isolating kind of area.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's scary because, they're so far out there that like, the First Order will get to them far faster. And, and that's exactly what happened. It's scary thinking about, occupation, even though it's very much more of a kid show in some ways than even Rebels. Like Dave really wanted to, Dave was at the same time was working on Mandalorian, and he was like, look, I sometimes feel like Star Wars is getting away from the kids. And, he said, George always told me, make sure that Star Wars always has to be accessible for kids. It can't just be a property that's meant for adults. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so he was really pushing sort of like the more sort of kid-friendly aspect, but he knew as well that it was going to go to a darker place, which Star Wars always does. Like even the prequel trilogy, it kind of in some ways followed sort of follow the formula of like the prequel trilogy, right? Like Phantom Menace is very, very kid-friendly, but by the time you get the Sith, it's very like, it gets much darker, much heavier, much weightier. So there's definitely a kind of a similar arc there, in many ways. And that's one of the reasons why I was looking at the prequel trilogy so frequently, like while I was working on it. And again, all the Star Wars films, but especially like, I just wanted to kind of like draw you in with these really friendly characters and very likable characters. And the sweeter and more likable they are, when the situation gets dire and dark, then you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to Cass? What's going to happen to Tam, to Niku? Like you really get worried that these sweet characters are getting drawn into a dark place. And to me, that's kind of like, that's where it really starts to sort of like take off,
Mm-hmm.
That's where it really starts to come together.
Yeah, Resistance is truly an ensemble cast. I mean, not only the core characters, but also all the supporting ones. I mean, you have, Gwendolyn Christie, Domhnall Gleeson, Elijah Wood playing Rucklin. You have Sam Witwer in there, Lucy Lawless. I mean, you have so many, not only actors and actresses, but just characters, the breadth of those characters and how the variety in species and Pit. I mean, like that character alone was so popular with fans, and like when he hits the one of the I think a First Order trooper with like his vacuum thing in the finale, I was just like, yeah, that was his moment. But like,
that's right.
What's it like to just approach the show where, like you said, Dave, and you want to take it in such a new direction and try something completely different, and then you get to introduce all of these just characters that we don't know, and also play within the sandbox with some amazing talent as well?
I mean, it was such an incredible like experience getting to even like, I mean, for me, like the greatest aspect of working on the show was just getting to invent, new races, new species, like new vehicles, new things that we've never seen before, getting to even, like come up with names for like species of classic characters that we didn't even, necessarily know about. I also have to mention Flix and Orca.
Yes, of course.
Icons.
I mean, Bobby Moynihan just texted me yesterday and he sent me like an Etsy link to a Niku action figure. And I was just like, oh, I have to get this. Like, I have to get this right now. I was super excited. I mean, the greatest part was just getting to like play in this giant sandbox, but contribute to the sandbox, get to like just world build and like add little, like, we always felt that, me and Justin and Athena always felt that we were kind of playing, we had this giant sandbox to play in, but, obviously because it's an animated series and not a movie, and it's a weekly series, you're also sort of limited by like how many assets that you can create. You just are. I mean, you see it even in a show as huge as Clone Wars or Bad Batch. You see that there's definitely, there's always limitations when it comes to television animation.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to get super inventive. And, but, coming up with like, I don't know if you guys know this, but like, Flix is a part of like, the Gazo race. And I got to come up with the name Gazo and base it, and, we based it off of these great Ralph McQuarrie drawings that were originally concept art for the Ewoks. And, the Yuzums were the others, but they never actually put a name to the Flix species. So I got to come up with a name, just little things like that. Just, it just was just amazing. It was just like kind of incredible that I got to like, contribute in some way. That's like me. It just reminded me of when I was a little kid playing, Star Wars RPG and coming up with aliens and races, but never in a zillion years would I have imagined that, that somehow some of those names and concepts and ideas would stick and become canon. Like that just, it just doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
You read the reference books, but you don't think you will be the reference book at some point.
I mean, getting to see that stuff on Wikipedia just alone is just like, owning the reference books and seeing, oh my gosh, there's like all these entries now, these new entries that, things that I've made up. That's just, just crazy. It still blows my mind. Like when I think about it, Like it just blows me away.
And even seeing, just one last point on this is Buggles' species appearing in the Bad Batch with Omega. Sarah and I were like, oh my God, Buggles! We were just freaking out that day. And to see that legacy continue with something that you've and the rest of the team created.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, it still just blows my mind. Like, I can't believe that, there's even like crossover, like just seeing things that we like came up with and also just seeing, just Star Wars comics and novels. And, there's like, like it's just, even the Star Wars video games, there's like, like Bonreg's mother, it's like a ship pilot. It's just incredible. Like, it still just blows me away.
So kind of thinking towards the day-to-day, the creative of this show and how it gets created, as fans, we only see the end product, but there's so many hours and conversations and work that goes into making an animated show in particular. So for our listeners, and us who are not a part of the animation and entertainment industry, who don't have the behind the scenes, what does the role of an executive producer, a head writer look like on a show like Resistance? And what is your day-to-day?
Boy, mostly my day-to-day is like, working on scripts, reading scripts, pitching premises, pitching story, thinking about like the story arc, working on animatics, going to the records, casting, pretty much like at all aspects. It's almost like being a director, without actually, directing the episodes per se, but it's just all of the creative aspects that go into it. It's very much sort of like if you're directing like a live action series or a movie, and I would also touch base daily with Athena and Justin Ridge. Justin and I would work on, I would usually fly up north and spend time up there working with Justin on story. I'd pitch him ideas. He would pitch me ideas. I would mostly work on the arcs, and then I would pitch Justin and say, this is where I think the characters are going. This is where I think these are some of the darker turns that will happen. These are some of the big twists that will hit this episode, and this episode. And then, Justin's side of it, he's more on like, working with the directors closely, and working with the storyboard artists. And then I would just basically do my notes on all the animatics. And then there would be obviously, in post-production, then you're doing any kind of pickup records, you do mixes, you do, sound design, all those aspects. But generally I was working more on story, and Justin was handling more of like the board artists.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of things all the time is the vibe
all the
I'm
time,
getting.
all day, constantly.
It sounds exciting and like there's something kind of a little different going on every day.
Oh yeah, for sure.
As you're working with all these different scripts, a lot of it makes it into the show, a lot of it doesn't. So you're seeing a lot of stuff. I would just love to know, what did you and the team like want the through line to be with all of the stuff that you came up with, and what was really at the core of the show and like its message to viewers, like, again, being different from what we've seen before. Like, what did you want that to kind of carry through each season?
Well, we definitely wanted to, carry through this message of like, I mean, even though it's for we say it's for kids, but really we try to make it for all Star Wars fans. I mean, I'm just a kid in an adult body. So, but really it's like the more sort of serious theme that I was really exploring, which is the sort of like anti sort of fascist, message of standing up for yourself and your family, like, is so important. And, like, even like as politically dark as things were, we weren't even really thinking about politics at the time, like current politics. But then as we were working on the show, it was just like, oh my gosh, like current politics are starting to mirror some of the fascism and some of the dark aspects of society that are creeping in. Felt very much like the First Order, just the things that were happening at that time. So we were really just seeing how things, different concepts were sort of being mirrored and playing out in real time as we were working on the story. But for me, it's always about like the individual and fighting sort of like, being swallowed up by like the machine, which is really what George Lucas, I think, it still goes back to mirroring the original concept of what Star Wars was all about. Like Star Wars being like kind of like a reaction to like even the Vietnam War. you know, in the 70s when he was working on that, like just the machinery of war and how that swallows up the individual. And so there's very much that, like, you can see how, like, just Tam, like, for me, like, the most poignant and, like, meaningful arc was really Tam's arc, you know, and that was the most serious, the most dire, you know, as goofy as Kaz and Niku could be, seeing, like, one of their, you know, beloved family members who, you know, Kaz had to keep a lot of secrets from, seeing her feeling betrayed and you know, her father figure, you know, Yeager was essentially lying to her, and you know, those sort of more serious themes and character arcs I thought were the most fun and interesting to write because there was the most drama around them. You know, I mean, I loved all the comedy and the fun, but once, like, you know, like I was saying earlier, like when the darker aspects of the show starts to kick in, the seriousness and seeing, like, you know, one of your good friends, one of your family members suddenly being pulled over to the other side, not unlike what was sort of going on politically, you know, at the time, like suddenly your friends and your, you know, your family members or your neighbors, like suddenly, like, you know, they have political opinions that don't necessarily line up with yours. That felt more, I don't know, that felt more relatable than ever over the past couple of years. So not to get too heavy or too political or anything like that, because I definitely don't want to do that. But, you know, it was, again, when we started, we weren't really thinking about those things as much, but then it just sort of lined up with reality and, you know, seeing, for me, like the end of season 1, when Tam's getting sucked in, you know, by tyranny and tyranny's lies and Pyre, and that just felt like, you know, just super emotional. Like I still, even watching those episodes now, I get choked up.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of the show, right? You're saying it's more for kids, but also here's this, you're saying one of the core messages is anti-fascism, which, like, right there, it has layers to the show. And to see Tam go on that journey from indoctrination and kind of understanding why she falls into the set of beliefs, to then see her question those beliefs throughout season 2 and then get rescued and apologize and get welcomed back with open arms easily by the rest of the crew is just like, oh my God, you know. And this is right before a pandemic hit that we're watching the series finale and we're crying our eyes out. Little do we know a lot of what's to come in our world, and it just hits different looking back, right? It's just it's a good message of hope, and you know, family is always there for you, and that's what you want out of your family. And Team Colossus is just like, it's our home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's a home that I love to, you know, revisit. And it's one of the shows that I'll never get bored of watching, even though I worked on it. It's just sort of, I even see new little things all the time, like things that the animators, you know, the board artists, like put in there, even in the corners. It's just such a rich, fun, you know, it's a very sort of comforting world because all the characters are so likable and relatable.
Yes to all of that. I mean, there's with the exception of Ruckland, because he's just kind of mean.
Yeah, totally.
But there's not a character that I don't love and feel has such a rich story and a rich history to them. And they're all just so beautifully, like, drawn and laid out and as characters. And so what was it like to write these characters and to kind of get in all of their heads?
Oh boy. I mean, it's interesting because they're all so different. So you really have to try and, like, dig into, like, an aspect of your own personality that, like, reflects, you know, that particular character. You know, like with Kaz, it was just sort of like my childhood sort of, you know, desire to, like, want to be something great or someone great, and to try and live up to, you know, my potential and the pressure that my family puts on me. You know, that's very much Kaz. You know, Tam is my rebellious nature and you know, feeling, you know, at times we all feel sort of left out and frustrated, and there's a lot of frustration in Tam, which I think is very, very relatable. You know, with anybody who, you know, feels that they're overlooked or left out. And you know, Niku is in many ways like in many ways me, but also equally Justin Ridge. Like we're both sort of big goofballs, and you know, we joke around a lot, and we're both kind of naive in our own ways, and that's definitely Niku. You know, it's harder to relate obviously with the First Order, other than, you really like the way I just sort of write villains is I try to think that, I'm not the bad guy. I'm the good guy. And here's the reasons why I think my way is better. Mm-hmm. With the First Order, it's all about order and control and just all of those aspects. That's like such a, that's just the First Order in a nutshell. Like they just want to control the galaxy. They want order. And so that's, very much, a part of who they are, but it's just so hard to relate to them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You're like, they're just kind of mean.
They're just mean.
I would love to know, one thing that really stands out with the show, not even with the characters, is the animation style. And I love how there's the cell shading versus like the traditional 3D that we're seeing with like the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch and even Rebels, although Rebels is still a little bit different from, much different from the Clone Wars. And I'd love to know like what went into, and even if you had any say in the decision to go the route of that cell shading versus the traditional 3D, and like how do you think that lent itself to the story that you wanted to tell or even helped it?
Well, I mean, the original idea was we wanted it to look a little bit more anime. Like Dave, for the longest time, like wanted to do like a cell shaded, very like anime style, and he really thought that this style would lend best to like. He just felt it was so clean and so bold and just so vivid. And to this day, Dave thinks that it's one of the best looking Star Wars shows. Like he's very, Dave is a huge. Obviously, he loves the show and he defends the show, and he thinks it's one of the best looks. And he just loves the fact that, every show from every era really has its own sort of distinct style. And I think when you want to do something that's like, that involves more humor, like cell shading is great because, you can sort of play more of the visual gags. They sometimes work, expressions can work a little bit stronger in cell shaded animation. And really it's like, it's the most, I mean, if you look at like the new, I don't know if you guys have checked out What If. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that animation on that.
Yeah. I mean, they have quite a bit of money to produce that, but in many ways, like I could see how similar it was to Resistance, in the cell shading, especially in like the way like the limbs work and the joints and the movement looks very much like Resistance, so that can definitely lend many ways to just like presenting this sort of clean, sort of very beautiful world that especially on Castellan, like I really thought those shots of the sunset over the water just look so beautiful. And those, like, if you go back and you rewatch a lot of those wide establishing shots of like the Colossus, like they look so gorgeous against the moonlight or the sunlight. So yeah, that was probably the biggest reason. And really it was because, Dave wanted to try something different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it worked. And success. I will agree with you in some of those wide and establishing shots where you're kind of getting to see the setting and are some of the most beautiful, I would say, and in the entire kind of Star Wars visual landscape. And it's so easy to fall in love with the big, bright, bold colors and the style that we get. And it's very approachable. Because while the characters feel real and they're silly, but they also have that level of like, I don't want to say like floatiness, but like noodliness that makes them a little bit elevated beyond like reality, which makes it easy to join in with them and imagine yourself in that silly world. But the Colossus itself is a very kind of contained setting. And while a lot of other Star Wars properties are jumping from planet to planet to planet, most of Resistance, at least in season 1, is right there on the Colossus, on Castellan. Were there any, challenges of having this sort of constrained setting, or was it a bit of a blessing in disguise, or did it actually, was it easy?
I mean, it was definitely difficult. The first few episodes were tough because I was like, we were definitely constrained to like, it was going to be mostly on Castellan with a couple of episodes that could be off world or, out in wild space or on like a derelict ship. But they spent so much time in season 1 designing and building out, like the ship, the Colossus, that like, we were really like, every time you'd see an episode, that was another aspect of the ship that we were building, of the Colossus that we were constructing. So we were really doing it so that by the time season 1 ended, we would have all of the ship built, we have all of the Colossus constructed, and then we could take off, and then we could spend more of our assets on like, shipping out other worlds or going through, space and through the galaxy, and really getting to see, more of what the rest of the galaxy is doing as they're gearing up for this new war. So it was difficult, but when you're in a situation where like you don't have like a ton of assets to work with early on, like you really just have to rely on building your characters, which is the most important aspect of anything anyway. Like any show or any any series, any comic book, any movie that you work on, like, set pieces are great and action is great, but it's really like if you don't have the characters, then you don't really have anything. Like the characters aren't there, or they're not appealing, or they're not original or unique, and if the chemistry isn't there between the characters, you're kind of screwed. Like you really have to like get that down. I mean, the reason why Star Wars worked so well back in the 70s and the 80s was the characters. Obviously like the stories were so great and so iconic and so archetypal, but it really gets down to the fact that like those characters are so awesome. And then you look at the other science fiction movies, a lot of them that came out in like the 70s or the 80s that either tried to be Star Wars, imitate the formula, which Star Wars didn't really imitate anything except for like maybe some of those early serials that like George Lucas grew up on, and even those, like I tried to watch some of those just like on like DVD or whatever, and they just they're obviously like serials, like they don't have the same kind of structure or the same, but George Lucas really just, he reinvented science fiction when he created the first Star Wars film. So, and then everybody else came along and tried to sort of replicate that, but the problem was that nobody could replicate the characters or the actors. That was the biggest problem. Like maybe they could have the special effects or whatever, but none of them like really, like science fiction didn't really take off again until like like the late 90s. Like there was no when maybe like The Matrix came around and some of the other bigger science fiction films that started coming around, but even that, like even like other science fiction properties or franchises still, and to my mind anyway, can't touch Star Wars.
Yeah, and I think the thing about Resistance is those characters, right? Because even though you like we're talking about, you're on the Colossus for all of season 1, anytime you go around the Colossus, you're meeting new characters, or like you discover the shell folk who live in the underbelly, and then you have the hangar, and then you have the marketplace, and then Doza's tower. So you have all these different set pieces. So even though you are on one world, it feels like you're exploring many within that. Bebo's mom, there's a whole underworld, and the pirates, so there's like this conglomeration of characters that works so well. And I think one thing in particular with Resistance that was also unique is the Force is not necessarily a big player in the show. There are some big moments like with Kel and Isla and those situations, which are wonderful when they kind of hint at those Force sensitivities. But was this something that was more of a conscious choice to like get away from having the Force as involved as other parts of the franchise, and really to center on characters who are everyday heroes in their own right without needing to be able to use the Force or to be a Jedi or to have any of these extraordinary powers?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like early on, like the discussions where Dave was like, I've done these shows and they always kind of end up about Jedis. Essentially, he was just like, I can't keep doing Jedis, new Jedis of every show that I work on. I've got to, Dave really wanted to, and he wanted to make a show that like focused primarily on racers that would, end up and pilots that would end up, being a part of the Resistance. So, early on it was like discussed, like, Dave was like, I really just don't want to bring, as soon as you bring a Jedi into the story, it becomes about the Jedi. Like, you know what I mean? Like as soon as like, if we brought like, even with Kel and Ella, we had to be very careful. That's why we kind of, to a certain degree, phased them out a little bit, because Dave was worried that early on they were far more Force sensitive and far more, in tune. And they were going to even both sort of learn more and even when they were first introduced, they had more Force abilities, and we kind of phased those out of every script that we worked on. Like we had even Force, we even had like, we're going to do even a story about like Force healing or before anybody. But then Dave was like, you know, the problem is that as soon as these kids become Force sensitive, then it becomes about those kids. And then Kaz is kind of sidelined because now it's like, oh, Force users, you know, Star Wars fans are like, Force users, we're sensitive. Like, oh, well, you know, I'm more interested in them than like the average pilot or whatever. And I get that. That makes perfect sense. It makes sense for the movies, and it makes sense for most of the, you know, the series. But then you've got, you know, like Rogue One, or you've got like, you know, other aspects of the franchise, you know, like Solo, which doesn't really touch on Force sensitives at all. You know, so we were kind of leaning more into that aspect of the franchise. And, you know, again, like those films didn't want to, you know, we're just worried about leaning into it, because then that's the thing that becomes the most interesting aspect, because everybody loves the Force. Everybody loves Jedi. And it's funny because, you know, like we had like, you know, Mika Gray, who originally early on was actually Asajj Ventress in the storyline. That was going to be an older version of Asajj Ventress. And that was Filoni's idea. And we were even going to have a scene where Asajj Ventress takes on Kylo Ren. That was something that we had discussed very early on. And then eventually Filoni's notorious for sort of like changing his mind. And then, you know, down the line, as we were progressing and, you know, the story had Asajj, you know, I wrote the story, and he was like, you know what? He was like, if Asajj comes in, then it's just going to be like, that's all the fans are going to care about. They're only going to want Asajj. They're not going to care about any of the other characters. And at first I was totally heartbroken. I was just like, oh, because I thought it was so cool what we were doing with that character and seeing how she had survived and all these things. And then it just didn't happen. So I was really bummed out. Then after Dave was just like, Dave was joking around. He was like, "You're going to quit, aren't you? You're upset, aren't you?" And I was like, no. It's like, because I totally got what he was saying. Like, it made perfect sense. Like, from this point on, it's going to be the Asajj show. Like, and if the episode didn't include Asajj Ventress, the fans were going to be upset. And if, you know, so, or at least a percentage of the fandom, you know, the fans who are watching it suddenly see, oh my God, there's a Clone Wars character. And I just want, you know, and then it would just kind of derail the show. And he was totally right. Like, you know, it's like, that's why he wanted to largely avoid as many of the sequel trilogy characters. Even though we did have plans, we were going to bring in Finn. I wanted to bring in Rose. If the show was going to be a huge hit, we were talking about a possible season 3, even though we had structured it to be a 2-series season, because there's only so much bandwidth that the team can, you know, handle. And there was also Bad Batch was in the works, more Clone Wars. So we were like, this is going to be, and we wanted to kind of wrap it up the same year that the sequel trilogy was wrapping. You know, a lot of people were like, oh, it got canceled. I'm like, no, it didn't. Like, we just felt that like to go on beyond the sequel trilogy was probably not going to really be that exciting. And, you know, it's just sort of like, it felt sort of, once that wrapped up, we just wanted to wrap up within the same year that the sequel trilogy. But if, you know, by some chance it was this ratings smash and the network demanded that we do more, like, you know, I wanted to even bring in, you know, the story would have went to, you know, the team meeting up for the giant battle, you know, the rise of Skywalker battle on Exegol. Like, it would have been that. We would have seen it from that aspect, but it probably wouldn't have, you know, the problem is that we wouldn't be able to afford to create a giant, huge battle. So we would probably only maybe lead up to it, and then we would cut out, just because we simply couldn't afford to make a huge, massive. We couldn't do what the movies do. Yeah, and you guys, you know, I think the fans know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like what the medium can handle and where resources are being allocated. It all, you know, unfortunately for our all creative minds, it'd be like, yeah, I would love to see it. It's just not always a reality, and that's fair, you know.
Totally. I mean, we had episodes. We actually had written episodes that got pulled. That's why season 2 is a little bit shorter than season 1. We had an episode where Axe Tegrin, you know, the bounty hunter, returned and actually infiltrated and took over, you know, the Colossus. That was one episode that we had written. Totally, you know, that was a great episode. Doza really shined in that episode. And then we had an episode where actually Maz showed up, and who's old friends with Mika Gray, and we wrote that, and that was about them infiltrating this ship like space station that was getting slowly pulled into a star, and that was like Maz and Mika were old friends. They were pirates back in the day, and together they were like, and they needed to get this relic from the ship before it was destroyed. And then, of course, like the First Order shows up, the relic hunters show up again, and they're trying to find this relic as well. And it's actually it's an ancient text that Maz is going to deliver to Rey. So at the very end of the episode, Maz would have given that to Rey as one of the texts that she was studying. And that text would have been key to, the things that she was learning, like force healing and things like that. So that was very cool. But again, we lost it, and we only lost it because those were coming towards the tail end of the season, and the most important episodes at the time were really those Tam episodes.
Yeah, absolutely, and making sure that her arc was fulfilled. I will say, like the Relic Raiders, Mika Gray, such a fascinating and fun and very like spooky, but also like Indiana Jones adventure at the same time, and so interesting to see her. So although she wasn't Asajj Ventress, she was such a fascinating character to watch in that episode, and I totally can see her being old friends with Maz. Like that totally tracks. And
she's an ex-Night Sister, which is something Filoni had mentioned, and I'm like, all right, that's canon.
Yeah. Love all the depth that goes into there.
I gotta say, the amount of time I spent with The Rise of Skywalker after it came out at the very end battle, kind of like pausing and like literally like a magnifying glass trying to find the Colossus somewhere in the background. I was like, where is it? But I do love the fact that one of the bucket lists, which we always talked about every week on our recap show, the final one had the art for, I think it was Tora's ship, Yeager's ship, and Kaz's ship. Yeah. The live action renderings of those at the Battle of Exegol, and we have Kaz, say, "Hey everybody," and the Rise of Skywalker novel, and then there's a deep voice that says, "Cut the chatter, Kaz," which we think it's Yeager because that would make sense, yeah. So that was just like wonderful for us Resistance fans reading that, even though we couldn't find it on screen, to get it in the book was really special. It like. I like threw my book. I was like,
Yeah, that blew me away. Like that was just so incredible, and getting to see all the ships and like the reference books, and talking to Pablo about how like there are going to be different aspects of characters that are going to fit into other novels, or at least and relatives and things like that in video games, and the fact that Von Reg's mom's in the video game, and just very in some of the video games, just all the cool sort of. I mean, to me, that's where it like when it starts to live outside of what we created. That's the big thrill is seeing other writers and artists, take the characters and the ships and the ideas and playing with them and taking them into seeing it go off in different directions is just so exciting. It's just such a thrill, and it's really just been. I mean, it was one of the great sort of thrills of my life, like working with Lucasfilm and the Star Wars team.
Absolutely. One thing I think about this show is the themes of family and caring for your community, especially, spending a lot of time thinking about the show last year in the midst of this pandemic, and really having that final episode just means so much to me as a viewer. For fans of all ages, what do you hope that they take away from Resistance, and what do you hope is the thing that they hang on to?
I really like hope that they like hang on to sort of like the innocence and the wonder that is Star Wars, and seeing the galaxy. You always think like Niku and some of these characters around the classes probably never saw much of the galaxy beyond Castellan, and once they take off, like there's, to me, that's so emblematic of like what Star Wars is all about, and seeing Star Wars when you're a kid for the first time, and just seeing like these worlds open up and these new alien species, and just how mind blowing that was. Like that's really like for me, like is the takeaway is really relating to these characters who are so sort of starry eyed and so like good and innocent and kind and caring. Like you really feel that like that this is an aspect of like the Star Wars, galaxy that you'd want to kind of live in, just because you would really love these characters. You'd really want to be around them. You wouldn't want to necessarily be like in some like spaceport with a bunch of pirates or gangsters, or that may sound exciting to a certain degree, but the reality is, if you were there, you would probably want to be around people that you cared about and you trusted, and you loved, who were sweet natured and innocent and kind, and we really just wanted to sort of like, that's what we really wanted to sort of exemplify, right? Like we wanted to really like remind you that these characters are really, they're good. Like they're good people and aliens and droids. and that's really, for me, the takeaway is that it's that sort of innocence restored,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. And I think as we start to close out here, our friends over at the Sky Talkers podcast, they have this saying, look to the animation for the future of Star Wars. And I would love to hear your thoughts on like what that phrase that they came up with means to you as it relates to, and in terms of the importance of animation as a medium to tell stories. Like, not just, it's always about live action all the time,
sure,
right? Like animation's just as important. And even Lucas has said that too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you've got Filoni, who came from animation, is now doing, live actions, working on all these different live action aspects. I mean, I think that quote is right. Like, you should definitely look to animation to see where, the future of Star Wars is going to go. It's so relevant. I mean, the great thing about, you look at Star Wars, and like the very first series were animated, like now that we've got all these great live action series, but at the beginning, like the series were animated, and really it was all about the characters. It was really about like the characters, who they are, how they relate. And just in exploring those characters, like I can kind of see where, at least, and just knowing Dave, like where I think certain aspects of the franchise are going to go. But it just excites me that you can explore these different corners of the galaxy, and then you get to see some of that stuff play out in live action. Who isn't excited for the Ahsoka series?
So to wrap it up, we kind of have like a short rapid fire, as Brad mentioned. So the first kind of question we have for that is, what's your favorite Star Wars story, or one that you always go back to, whether it be from a TV show, a book, a movie, just a story that touches your heart?
Boy, again, going back, I love every aspect of Star Wars. So it's just so hard to pick. But Rebels had such a great story, and it was just so. I love Rebels. I just love the characters, and that entire arc with Ezra and everyone just was so emotional and amazing. Going back to just like, boy, I love the prequel and the sequel trilogy and the original trilogy. Boy, that's just so hard to, again, if we're going rapid fire, I just have to, I would say Rebels, because it's just so, it's just so near and dear to my heart, and knowing Filoni and what he, and getting to see them working on it and wrapping it up as I was working on Resistance. That was a thrill.
Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. The end of that series coinciding with so many other things in Star Wars was so special. It was a great time to be a fan. Still is.
Absolutely. For sure.
This is a completely hypothetical question. If you could choose any Resistance character and kind of just plop them into a Star Wars story that we already know, or even just like a time period, who would you choose? And like, even when?
Oh man. That's really tough. I would love to see Kaz, obviously we're working on the show while the movies were getting developed, but I would have loved to see Kaz somehow more integral into the movie, the sequel trilogy. That was impossible, but that would have been amazing. But even seeing like Niku hanging out with like, Jar Jar during like the prequel trilogy would have been like freaking amazing. Although maybe some of the other characters' heads would have exploded, but I think it would have been hilarious and incredible. Like, I don't know, maybe how some of the fans react, but hey, I love Jar Jar, and like I was telling Filoni, like there's no character in like the the prequel trilogy that I really kind of don't love, and I'm a Jar Jar apologist, so which I don't think there should be a need to have it. There shouldn't really be a need to have a Jar Jar apologist, but I understand certain fans' reactions. Every fan is different, but yeah, I would just love to have Nico and Jar Jar hang out for like, for maybe like during the Phantom Menace.
They would be best buddies. And
totally.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That would be so much fun to watch.
They would
I would love to see Niku talking about Gorgs to Jar Jar and just be like, well, gorks are just delicious food. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, or have like an eating contest or something.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're big Doza fans, so I think for us, our answer would be like Doza in his early Empire days and like falling in love with Vanessa. I'm like, I want to see that.
That's
like
a beautiful
Strikes Back.
Yeah, that's a fantastic.
Love those characters.
Fantastic. Yeah, during Empire Strikes Back, going into Return of the Jedi and seeing how like Vanessa got Doza out of the Empire during like right before the like the second Death Star battle. That would have been incredible. Like I would have loved to see that as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Maybe in the future.
Yeah, I've heard rumors, so we'll see what happens.
Do you have a favorite memory from like on set is a live action term, but kind of anywhere working on this? Do you have a favorite memory from the show?
Oh boy. I think my two favorite memories would be the first time that I got to go to Lucasfilm and meet Filoni and, although I'd met him before, but just really hang out with him and get to know him. And that was like an out of body experience. And then the second time was the first time I got to actually go to Skywalker Ranch to break stories in like the big house with Dave and the whole Lucasfilm crew, Justin and Carrie and Athena and Josh, all those guys, just getting to hang out, for days on end, talking story, watching, Robotech, just hanging out. Those were like out of body experiences.
And our last question here, which, in the spirit of remembering Resistance Day, we have to ask you really, how do you remember Resistance?
I remember Resistance as one of the best times of my life and my career. Making new friends, still hanging out with all of them. Justin moved into my neighborhood like this year, and Christopher Sean lives like a block away from me. Like, so, getting to hang out with those guys and just, talk about Resistance and play, Star Wars board games or just hanging out, just all the friends that I got to make and just the times I got to spend, like, there was nothing like it, and there'll probably be never anything again like it, like in my career. It was just utterly mind blowing.
It's, I think I can say the same for Star Wars fans who were watching it. And, I think a lot of people maybe, counted it out too early on, but those who stuck around and stuck with the story, and even like you said, seeing all the new fans join the Resistance bandwagon, even almost 2 years after it's over, is just so cool. We got messages last year after this event that said like, "Oh, I just started watching Resistance," and I was like, "Yeah, we did it." Even if we get one person, You
guys are the best.
It's really special. So thank you for being a part of the celebration this year. It means the world to us, and I'm sure many listeners are having a ball listening to this. So thank you so much, Brandon. Where can our listeners find you online, and what do you have coming up that you'd like to promote?
Yeah, well, add me on Instagram and just look up Brandon Auman. Pretty easy to find on Instagram. I'm working on a new show for Amazon. It's a Dungeons and Dragons inspired show. It's Critical Role, The Legend of Vox Machina. So if there are any Critical Role fans out there who are also Star Wars fans, like we're one. Like D&D was a huge thing for me growing up in RPGs. But yeah, that's what I'm working on next, and it's going to debut we're not quite sure, hoping very, very soon. But that'll be my next project, and stay tuned. Yeah, add me on Instagram.
Awesome.
Will do. We'll be looking forward to that premiere.
Yes.
Awesome.
So thank you once again, Brandon, and until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you both.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to our interview with Brandon. We hope that you got as much out of it as we did talking to him. It was just seriously such a pleasure to have him join us for an hour to talk all about Star Wars Resistance and what went into the show and what it was like to work with Dave and the crew. It's just such an amazing insight from Brandon. And I cannot wait to, it just makes me more excited to revisit the series going into the future.
I know we got an hour with him, but I just feel like there's so much more to pick his brain about. We could have talked to him for 3 hours, 4 hours, just about all things Star Wars Resistance. So it was a real blessing. And thank you so much for joining us on this ride today.
Yeah. So this is our last interview as part of Remembering Resistance 2021, which is very exciting. And what a way to kick it out. But thank you all for joining us this weekend, and continue using that hashtag Remembering Resistance today to spread the love of Star Wars Resistance and make sure it is never forgotten. So as for myself and Sarah, you can find us both on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads. And you can also find the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure wherever you listen, subscribe to the show so that way all of our new episodes drop right into your podcast feed. And if you have a couple extra minutes in your day and you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a written review because it helps other people find the show and join the discussion, especially all those Resistance fans out there who we hope find this podcast and enjoy the show along with us.
Yes, and if you find yourself at the end of this interview going, I want more Resistance right now, we have a bunch of episodes and interviews from Remembering Resistance 2020 that are still in our feeds that you can catch up on anytime to cure your Resistance fix. And we also have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1, and we are so grateful for all of our patrons for help making this show happen every day. And they are Amy, Anna, Brian, Cheryl, Deborah, Donnie, Elegy, Jesse, Jen, Knights of Ren, Huang, Levi, Lindsay, Lucy, Marie Claire, Neil, Rachel, Sarah, Saber Bouquet, Sky Talkers, Travis, and T. We appreciate you so much.
Yes, absolutely. So once again, thank you all for listening. And until next time, Team Colossus out.